Testing.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
I think we're going to get started. So, good evening on this beautiful rainy night. Welcome to Kingswood Church. Thank you so much for coming out in this weather. We've spent so much time planning this program, but we just didn't plan for the weather. So, thank you so much for coming out, and especially to our 4 speakers for coming as well. They have busy jobs during the day and other responsibilities, so we really appreciate it. And thank you to our online audience as well for tuning in. I think there may be more of them than there are here because of the weather. The statistics about gun violence are grim. In 2020, the most recent year for which complete data is available, over 45,000 people died from gun-related injuries in the U.S., according to the Centers for Disease Control. That figure includes gun murders and gun suicides, along with 3 other less common types of gun-related deaths. In fact, more Americans died of gun-related injuries in 2020 than in any other year on record, also recorded by the CDC. Each day in our country, 12 children die from gun violence. Another 32 are shot and injured. And of course, gun violence hit home for all of us this summer with the horrific shooting in Highland Park, a community right next door. The topic of gun violence is troubling, and so often we read about it, but we don't really understand it, and sometimes we feel helpless about what we can do. In fact, this topic has come up many times in the life group that I belong to here at Kingswood, and for those of you who don't attend here, our life groups are small discussion groups where we talk about things that are on our mind or that concern us. And collectively, we realize that there's a lot of information that many people don't have as well. So we came up with the idea for this program tonight to answer our own questions, which we think the answers will be useful to other people as well. So I'd like to recognize the people who are in my life group for helping to organize this. So if they could raise their hand or stand up. Sue Fujiu, who heads our life group and helped organize this program and was really the brains behind it. Roberta Yoshida, who's in the back, who chairs the missions team here. Sherry Imperial, who's also in the back. Ruth Anderson, also in the back. And Karen Wernette, who is out of town. Also, the Kingswood Social Justice Diversity Committee, which I co-chair, is also partnering in this program. And I want to thank Ted Whedon, who's in the back, who volunteered to help out tonight as well. I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. Just so you're aware, as I mentioned, the program is being live streamed on our Facebook and YouTube channels. And a big shout out to our assistant pastor, Clayton Edwards, who is handling all the sound and the recordings tonight. And thanks to him, there will be a recording of this program that can be shared. The format tonight is pretty simple. Each one of our speakers will be introduced and have a chance to speak briefly. In the interest of time, we are not taking questions from the floor. However, your questions are still very welcome. As you entered the sanctuary, hopefully you received an index card from one of our volunteers, and please feel free to write down any questions that you have, and if you want to direct it to any one of the speakers so that can be helpful in who should answer it. And then if you're done writing it, if you could raise your hand, the volunteers will come and get it. Or if you have more than one question, you need another card, raise your hand and they will come and give you another one. Those of you who are online can also submit your questions in the chat, and Clayton is going to pass them on to us. After our last speaker, Sue will read as many of the questions as we have time for. Finally, we're Methodists here. Methodists are known for sharing hospitality, so please join us for some cookies and coffee and refreshments after the program. in the room outside of the sanctuary. And hopefully, if you didn't have your question answered, you could maybe have some time to speak with some of our guests who have graciously allowed to hang around for a little while. To get us started, our lead pastor, James Preston, will say a few words, then Sue will introduce our first speaker. James?
Thank you, Jean, and again, a warm welcome to each of you to Kingswood Church, where we seek to love God, serve others, and build sacred community. And we're grateful that you're here, and on behalf of our staff and our members and our clergy staff, we welcome each of you, and we're so glad to be a part of this community and feel like this is an opportunity to serve our community and be a place for learning around this very important issue. So again, a warm welcome, and we know that you can bring in coffee, and you're welcome to do that during the meeting tonight if you'd like. We want you to be welcome, and restrooms are down center in East Hall, and if there's anything we can do, we have several greeters here this evening to help you. This is such an important topic. As Jean said, we're Methodist Christians in our tradition, and we have 3 rules we follow that are based on our sacred writings in Scripture. One is do no harm. Do good and stay in love with God and others. And we are deeply committed to doing no harm and doing good. So tonight's program is a part of what we believe living our faith is in this community and as a church, that indeed we work to do no harm and to end violence. When I was a junior in high school in West Texas, a young man brought a gun to school and shot another student in my high school in the band hall in which I was present. I will never forget that as long as I live. That fear, that uncertainty, this place of safety was no longer a place of safety. So from that very beginning, my heart was changed to work against violence and work against gun violence in particular. And then I witnessed Uvalde, and I grew up in Texas, and we had dear family friends there and connections, and so it came close again. And then on July 4th, I was at the beach in Evanston with friends when we heard the horrible news of what had happened there. We have people who teach there. We have people who live there. We love that community. In fact, those dear ones, their pictures are still on the door of my office to remind me every day that we are to work against violence and do no harm. So we're so grateful that you're here tonight as we try to find solutions and to work toward a place of peace, not violence, that gun violence would no longer be present in our world and in our community and in our nation. So we hope tonight is a wonderful time of exploring that reality that we feel called deeply to be a part of, to do no harm and to end harm in every way. I'm going to invite you to pray with me to center us for tonight's meeting. O Holy One, we thank you for this beautiful day, and we thank you for all of the amazing people who have gathered this evening out of a deep commitment to do no harm, to stay in love with you and your people, and to do good in the world. God, our hearts are broken every time we hear of mass shootings, school shootings, shootings in nightclubs, and places that should not be places of violence and fear. And we pray that tonight you would send your wisdom and spirit in our discussions and our questions into our speakers, that we might see solutions and begin to work forward for a peaceful and just world. We pray special blessings on Officer Malcolm Baker and Lieutenant Tara Anderson, your protection, and we are grateful for their leadership. We thank you for Representative Daniel Didich, and we pray your wisdom for him and his leadership. And we're thankful for Sherry Williams and Moms Demand Action and their witness in our community and our world, and pray for your guidance and strength and encouragement. Tonight, God, send your spirit, that indeed we might be open to your direction as these 4 amazing people lead us in this very sacred time. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Our first speakers tonight are our representatives from the Buffalo Grove Police Department. And on your left is Lieutenant Tara Anderson, who's Staff Services Lieutenant. She's been with the Buffalo Grove Police for 22 years and helps with special events planning. And I know she's helped us at Kingswood, especially on Memorial Day when we have our ceremony at Knox Cemetery. And she's also a member of the Lake County Critical Incidents Response Team. And also here is Officer Malcolm Baker, who's been with the Buffalo Grove Police for 18 years and is the Police Community Officer for Research and Engagement. And they will speak to us for about 10 or 15 minutes, and let's welcome them.
Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate the invitation to be here tonight. So as members of the law enforcement community, we wanted to come this evening to simply give you some facts regarding the prevalence of firearms in the United States, help you perhaps define what an assault weapon is, and then further explain what laws are currently in effect in the state of Illinois. And certainly as law enforcement officers, we're required to operate within the bounds of the law. We're not your policymakers, so those questions will be better served for our other panelists. But again, we more or less want to give you some general information so you understand the way things operate today. Okay? So there are currently an estimated 393 million firearms in the United States. So that's all types. And the majority of those are handguns. Only 6.6 million are registered. To put that into perspective, that's about 120.5 firearms per 100 residents in the United States. So there are more firearms than residents in the United States. And that's according to the Small Arms Survey in 2018. Now, to define assault weapons, again, there is no concrete definition of an assault weapon. The federal government has a certain perspective. Our local ordinances all have slightly different definitions of those, but in general terms, the federal government generally refers to a military-style weapon capable of firing multiple rounds, either in a semi-automatic or fully automatic fashion. So to citizens, many people think of assault weapons as an AR-15 or an M16 style weapon. There is an important differentiation, and that's that civilian AR-15s generally do not have the ability to select fire capabilities. So to go from semi-automatic to fully automatic, which is like a machine gun. So the caveat to that is that people certainly can modify their firearms. In Buffalo Grove, our municipal ordinance states that an assault weapon means a machine gun, which is defined as a weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can be readily restored to shoot automatically more than one shot without reloading by a single function of the trigger. So a whole lot of words. I did provide our municipal ordinance. There are copies outside at the table. You're welcome to take them. And for those of you viewing online, you can also look up our municipal code online, okay? As far as the prevalence of AR-15 style rifles, there are reportedly 20 million AR-15 style rifles in circulation in the United States. And that's according to the National Shooting Sports Foundation in 2018, and that information has been published by a number of other sources, like Forbes. To put that into perspective, the population of the state of Illinois in 2022 is estimated to be 12.48 million people. So again, there are more AR-15s in circulation in the United States than the entire population of Illinois. So what does that mean for Illinois, and what are the laws currently in effect in Illinois? To legally possess firearms or ammunition, Illinois residents must have a firearms owner identification card, commonly known as a FOID card. So there is a process by which someone applies and has to pass certain qualifications in order to obtain that FOID card. That license is valid for 10 years. Individuals who want to carry a firearm in a concealed fashion have to apply for a concealed carry license, commonly known as a CCL. Those licenses are valid for 5 years. It's important to note that you do have to have a valid FOID card in order to have a concealed carry license. Everyone who wants to carry a concealed firearm in Illinois is required to have a concealed carry license, except for current peace officers and eligible retired police officers. So knowing that these FOID cards are out in public and that people do have CCLs, there are ways to have those items revoked. In Illinois, we have something called a clear and present danger form. These are also available online. You could go to the Illinois State Police website if you're curious to see what the actual form looks like. But law enforcement, as well as school administrators, are required to report certain incidents to the Illinois State Police within 48 hours. Within 24 to 72 hours of the incident that causes alarm. So this reporting process is intended to prevent individuals that pose a clear and present danger from having access to firearms or firearms ammunition by revoking that individual's FOID card. So after this form is sent into the state police, it is reviewed, and we are actually contacted. The individual who submits the form is actually contacted to find out whether or not that finding is upheld or not. At that point, the law enforcement agency in which the individual had the FOID card, is notified. The individual who possessed the FOID card is notified, and they are supposed to turn in their firearms or transfer the firearms to someone who is allowed to possess them. They are required to report that. Again, all that has to be done within 48 hours. Now, the success of that is, again, debatable, but that is the process, and I can tell you that here in Buffalo Grove, people do, in fact, turn in firearms or transfer firearms if they're required to do so. Currently in the state of Illinois, there are 2.4 million FOID cards, and that's according to State Police Director Kelly as of August 2022, and approximately 20,000 FOID cards are revoked each year. Now, you might wonder how people can buy, sell, trade firearms. Individuals who want to commercially sell, lease, or otherwise transfer firearms have to obtain a federal firearms license. That's an FFL. The state of Illinois further requires an Illinois certification, and that's through the Firearm Dealer Licensing Certification Act. So if FFL dealers are doing business in the state of Illinois, they also have to have that additional certification. As far as the Village of Buffalo Grove, the Village of Buffalo Grove doesn't allow us to commercially sell firearms or ammunition. We do have that weapons ordinance in effect, which I recommend you read. And citizens are welcome to turn in any unwanted firearms or ammunition, and we will willingly take those in and set them for destruction. So again, just a helpful habit. So as I turn the mic over to Officer Baker, I just want all of you here to know that probably the best thing you can do is be aware. Your awareness and your reporting is key. I've heard time and time again, after the fact, after incidents, that people are not surprised. They're not surprised by what they heard, who did it, the circumstances. So really all of us need to take an active role, and if you see something, say something. Again, safe gun storage is incredibly important, especially given the prevalence of firearms. And just know that Buffalo Grove is an incredibly safe community, but as you know, tragedy can strike anywhere. The Buffalo Grove Police Department is certainly vigilant, but it takes all of your vigilance as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Officer Malcolm Baker.
Thank you, and thank you again for having us today. And I'm going to go over some brief ways to keep ourselves safe. Of course, when we get to questions, I'm happy to delve further into these brief examples that I give you. But some examples are in your home, business, or place of worship, take a security assessment. Make sure security doors are always in working order and secure. There's always that irritating, faulty door that people always say, one day, I'm going to get that fixed. And we all know that those days turn into weeks, that turn into months, and turn into years. Make sure we address those as soon as possible to make sure that They're secure so an intruder won't have easy access. Make sure exits are accessible and easy to find. Go over areas with staff members. Make sure everyone knows several different options to exit the building. Make sure exits are properly lit and marked. And ensure you have reliable access control. In other words, someone to monitor who enters your facility, and that all people who enter your facility have actual business being there. By the way, the Buffalo Grove Police Department, for businesses, homes, or places of worship in Buffalo Grove, we offer free security assessments. So anyone that's interested in Buffalo Grove can contact the Buffalo Grove Police Department and ask for the Community Relations Unit, and we'll walk you through how to get you started on that. Going forward, create an emergency action plan for your home, business, or place of worship. Find a plan that works best for your setting. Some things to consider are have clear procedures set in place, including escape procedures, have a floor plan in place, have meetings with staff to ensure everyone is on the same page if a threat enters the building, provide several different options for escape and meetup points. Have a method of reporting emergencies. This could be something as simple as notifying everyone in the building to evacuate. An example can be an intercom using in plain language what the problem is. For example, someone on an intercom saying, there's a shooter in a building, evacuate. We don't want to get complicated with code blue or code red or code black. Plain English is the best way to limit confusion. And of course, call 911. Have an emergency contact information accessible and available. Make sure someone is responsible for having information regarding the building manager, who normally would have access to keys to interlocked areas. And train your mindset on an active threat situation. We have seen that these dangerous situations can happen anywhere. When these situations happen, it's quick, and most of the damage is done before first responders even arrive to the scene. Some examples of how to be aware are, obviously, be aware of your surroundings. An example could be when you enter a restaurant. It's a quick and painless scan of the building of where are the nearest exits. You can sit down and have a meal with your family, but you have a mental note of if a situation happens, you know where to escape quickly. Be aware of anything out of the ordinary. Do you notice arguing? Do you notice any disturbances occurring? Be alert for noises, smells that are not reasonable for your setting. Assess the situation based on your observations to make a reasonable determination of any potential criminal activity or risk to others. Not all behaviors mean an active threat is imminent, but taking small mental notes of some situations might lead up to a threat that could be helpful. If you see a situation, of course, that it's unsafe and suspicious, no matter what, we welcome you to call 911. The Buffalo Grove Police Department also offers active threat training. We're also happy to sit in on active threat trainings that exist in your facility. So again, if you're interested in that, feel free to call the Buffalo Grove Police Department, ask for the Community Relations Unit, and we'll walk you through on how to get that done. And last, we're gun safety, of course. If you live in a home where guns are available, it's important to make sure that they're only accessible to their owners. Make sure all guns are in a secure location, preferably a gun safe. Be consistent when storing your weapons. For example, when I get home, the first thing I do before I talk to anybody, I make sure that I store my weapon in my gun safe. Because things come up, you walk in the house, well, problems exist, or we got flooding in the basement, or the kids are acting up. Easy to get away from what you have to do. First thing is first, secure your gun. Get that done so you're consistent, so you don't forget. And I want to mention that if you have guns in your house, or if you know of other people that have guns in their homes who don't have gun locks, I've brought a few gun locks here that are complimentary. So after everything is over, if you're interested in having a gun lock, come see me. I'll make sure you get one. And also, if you can just remind people that they can also stop by the Buffalo Grove Police Department. We have extra gun locks there. Thanks again for inviting us to this panel. Again, when the time comes, I'm happy to answer any questions further about how to stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of these great officers for packing a lot of information into a short time. Thank you so much. And I would like to remind anybody who may have taken a card, if you wrote down a question in between the speakers, if you want to pass it to the back, the volunteers will be glad to take it. Representative Daniel Dittich grew up right here in Buffalo Grove, raised by a family of small business owners. He's also a Stevenson High School graduate. In addition to being a legislator, Daniel works as a local government attorney, providing legal counsel to suburban villages, school districts, park districts, and community colleges. As a state legislator, his district is quite expansive. I'm going to read the names of all the towns, representing Buffalo Grove, Vernon Hills, parts of all these communities: Buffalo Grove, Vernon Hills, Mundelein, Riverwoods, Lincolnshire, Wheeling, Indian Creek, Mettawa, Libertyville, Park City, and Waukegan. So probably most people in the room may be in his district. Representative Dittich is an outspoken supporter of common-sense gun reforms, such as banning military-style assault weapons, requiring universal background checks, and improving the state's red flag laws. I recently attended a legislative program where he spoke, and I was very impressed with his knowledge of all the legislation that has been introduced this year, which I was unaware of, and legislation that's actually passed, and some really concrete things that we can all make a difference in Springfield, which I hope he'll talk about tonight. So we're grateful that he agreed to come tonight to help us understand where this legislation stands and how we can share our views. Representative Dittich.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Great. Yes, so thank you. Yes, my name's Dan Dittich. I'm the state representative for the 59th District. Unfortunately, this is an issue that I could probably talk for hours and hours about. It's been such an acute problem, not just in our community, in our state, but the entire country, that as a policymaker, I've, by necessity, have had to become, I don't want to say an expert, but knowledgeable about the various public policy aspects of this issue. But I'll try to keep my remarks as short as possible and hopefully leave some time for questions at the end. I want to talk today essentially two things. One, I want to give an overview of what we've done over the past few years in the legislature to eliminate or at least reduce gun violence in Illinois, and give you a little bit of information of how I see this moving forward as we consider some other proposals that are moving their way through the legislature right now. So I became a state representative in 2019. One of the first actions that was taken after I became a state representative is Governor Pritzker signed our gun dealer licensing bill, which was a very significant accomplishment. It gave our state a lot of tools to crack down on some of the rogue gun dealers that were supplying a significant number of the illegal guns that were circulating in Illinois. The next year was 2020. It was our COVID pandemic year. We were in Springfield only really 2 weeks the entire year, so we didn't get a lot done on a whole host of issues. So when we came back in 2021, we had a big backlog of legislation that we had to deal with, and that year we passed the Fix the FOID bill, which tightened up our background checks in Illinois, put in place universal background checks for the first time in Illinois. That was a piece of legislation that was responsive to, in a lot of ways, to the tragedy that happened in Aurora. In Aurora, the individual who committed that crime should not have had a gun. He had been convicted of a crime in a different state. If the Illinois State Police had known about that, he would not have been allowed to have a FOID card in Illinois. So what we did is we tightened up our background check system to make sure that ISP, the Illinois State Police, is able to have that sort of information when they're making their determinations as to whether they award a FOID card. Now this year, we made a lot of progress. We did a lot of really important things. Number one, we banned ghost guns. Number two, we funded an outreach program to educate the public on the best practices for safe storage. when we talk about gun violence, we're not only talking about mass shootings, we're not only talking about gang violence, we're also talking about things like suicides, we're talking about accidental gun deaths, and one of the biggest sources of accidental gun deaths is guns that are left unsecured in the home, that sometimes children will get a hold of that we don't want them to. So making sure that gun owners have the information that we want them to have of how to securely store your guns in a way that they won't accidentally fall into the wrong hands, that was something very important that we did this year. Third, we also wanted to be responsive to the increase in hate, the increase of anti-Semitism, the increase of white supremacy that we're seeing across our country. So what we funded was $20 million worth of grants to nonprofit organizations that are at a heightened risk of being at a threat of terrorism. So this will be houses of worship, religious schools, community centers, places that have been targeted by violence across the country. We put in place a grant program so those organizations will have an opportunity to get state funding for whatever security measures that they feel is appropriate to make sure that their facilities can be a safe place for their membership to go to. So that's kind of the highlights of what we've done over the past few years. Going forward, the tragedy in Highland Park, I think, exposed some additional problems in our system that we need to tighten up. Just like after the Aurora tragedy, we realized we needed to make some changes to our FOID card system. After the Highland Park tragedy, we realized we needed to make some changes to our clear and present danger system. The individual who committed the crime in Highland Park, he had a previous encounter in law enforcement where they were called to his residence as the result of some threats that were being made involving knives. And for a variety of reasons, there was no clear and present danger report made to ISP after that encounter. Now, the police didn't do anything wrong in that encounter. They, as the officer said, they were following the policies that we put forward by the state. But what we've discovered is that there's holes in those policies, right? So we want to make sure that just because a situation gets de-escalated or just because somebody is under the age of 18 and not yet eligible for a FOID card, right? There's all sorts of reasons why a clear and present danger report might not get made now, but going forward, what we've learned in Highland Park is that we want them to get made in certain circumstances. So we have some working groups right now that are developing legislation to improve our clear and present danger standard. And then two, the big one that's gotten a lot of publicity that I think we're pushing forward on too is banning assault weapons. The reason why we are prioritizing that is because we know it works. If you look at the data, from 1994 to 2004, we had an assault weapon ban on the books for the entire United States of America. When it went into effect in 1994, mass shootings went down by over 40%. When it expired in 2004, since then mass shootings have gone up by almost 250%. So we know that having this assault weapon ban on the books reduces the amount of gun violence. Does it get rid of all of it? No. Will some people continue to commit atrocities with things such as handguns or shotguns? Of course. But we know that those incidents will be less deadly and they'll be less common. And I think just because we're not able to prevent all acts of violence, we're not able to prevent all evil, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do everything we can to save as many lives as possible and to make sure that our communities and our schools are as safe as we can possibly make them. So that, there may be other legislation that we're working on too. I know we have a very active working group that's being chaired by my colleague, Representative Bob Morgan. He represents the Highland Park community, and he was asked by the speaker to lead that working group. I know he's working very hard on that, and his group of legislators are working to develop legislation that I hope we will have an opportunity to vote on either when we return to Springfield the end of November or in January when we go back for our lame duck session. So that's kind of my overview of where we came from and where I see us going over the next near future in the legislature. So thank you everyone for inviting me to this program. Happy to share whatever insights I have, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
You know, I'm going to actually extend your remarks for a minute. Can you, because one of the things I did hear you speak about, which you shared information with us, is about people making comments to legislators through the witness slips. Do you just say something very briefly
Yeah,
about that?
so witness slips, if you're not familiar with the legislative process, we have a way for the public to interact with us when we're in Springfield called witness slips. And what that means is you can go on your computer, you can pull up any bill that's being considered, and you can file a witness slip either as a supporter of the bill, as an opponent of the bill, or that you're neutral on the passage of the bill. This is a helpful way for members of the public broadly to communicate with us when we're down in Springfield. We pay attention to these, right? It helps us determine the intensity of public support about certain different issues. So let's say, for example, we're about to vote on the assault weapon ban, and say there's a legislator who's going back and forth. They think it's a good idea. They're worried their constituents are going to be mad at them if they vote for it. They might pull up the witness slips. If they see that there's 20,000 people who have filed a witness slip in support versus only 100 or 200 who filed a witness slip and opposed, that's something that could play into their determination of how they're going to vote on the bill. They might look at that and say, wow, there's a lot of energy across Illinois that wants us to pass this, not a whole lot of energy wanting us to vote no on this. That's the sort of thing that potentially can sway how a legislator votes on the issue. We also use it to determine the positions of important interest groups. In the gun violence prevention context, if there's a bill we're about to vote on, we may want to see how Moms Demand Action members feel about this bill, right? So when you file a witness slip, you can file your name and your organization. So you can say your name with Moms Demand Action, and I can see whether you support the bill or whether you oppose the bill. Same thing with some of the other interest groups, the Brady campaign or GPAC or the other gun violence prevention organizations that we interact with. We want to know where they stand on certain bills. So it's helpful for their leadership and for their membership to file witness slips just so we can be informed about where all these different groups stand on different bills.
Thank you. And also, I've printed out the instructions that your office sent. So there's copies out here in the fireside room if you want to take one. Also, again, this is in between speakers. If you want to hand in any of your questions, this is a good time. I think there's somebody right here who has a question. Our final speaker tonight is Sherry Williams. Sherry joined Moms Demand Action, a grassroots movement of Americans fighting for public safety measures to protect people from gun violence after the shooting at Parkland High School. A mother of 2 children, she later became a Be Smart for Kids co-leader, a program that empowers families to make sure their children are safe from guns. Last year, she became the local group leader for the Northwest Suburbs chapter of Moms Demand Action. Sherry's worked with other area churches, including the First United Methodist Church in Arlington Heights, where she helped organize a candlelight vigil in May in response to the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And I also heard her presentation online with a Lutheran church recently. Her organization also works with community groups and the medical community and school districts to encourage a culture of responsible gun ownership. She's going to share with us tonight some of the ways her groups and others are promoting gun safety. Sherry?
Thank you, Jean and Kingswood Church, for inviting me tonight on this very important topic. As Jean mentioned, I joined Moms Demand after the Parkland massacre. And the reason why I did, at the time, my boys were in high school and middle school, and my husband is an early childhood educator. I just didn't want to be one of those parents or spouses where their family didn't return home at the end of the evening because of gun violence. And the reality is that it could happen to any one of us any single day. And so instead of being a keyboard warrior and arguing with people on Facebook, I decided to get away from my computer screen and get on the front lines and do something about it. So as Jean mentioned, I went to a Moms Demand meeting and I decided to get involved. I became a Be Smart for Kids leader, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And I've been a local group lead for our Northwest Suburbs group, which is comprised of Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, Prospect Heights. And we have monthly meetings, so I'll talk about that in a moment. Our Moms Demand group, it's a national organization. It's increased since May from all the recent shootings in the news, and we're up to about 10 million volunteers nationwide. Our group, a lot of it is based on the work that we do on behalf of survivors. So one of the sayings that we have is honor with action. And so we push forward so that we can make sure that this doesn't happen to any other family, and so that we can honor the people who have passed, because we don't want this to happen to anyone else. So a survivor such as Representative Lucy McBath from Georgia, she lost her only son to gun violence because he was listening to music too loud in his car. And so for people like that, we fight in Jordan's name. One of the things I want to mention is that Moms Demand is a grassroots organization. We're often referred as mothers and others. So you don't have to be a mom, you don't have to have children, and you don't have to, you can be dads, you can be men, you can be unmarried. One of the meetings that we had over the summer, it was at Gatsby's in Arlington Heights, and one of the staff was leaving at the end of her shift, and she said, "I'm not a mother, but I'm just sick and tired of all this." And I looked at her and I said, "You don't have to be a mother. You go to the grocery store, you go to the mall. This is all of us." And so that's what we're about, is for fighting for our freedom to live our own lives safely, to gather in a place like this tonight to have this conversation. Another thing I want to point out is what was mentioned tonight is that the massacres that you see in the news every day, they're just a small fraction of what goes on. So gun violence is a daily occurrence. If you see on a lot of the news media sites, these are shootings that happen 2-3 times a day in Chicago and major metropolitan cities. And the heartbreaking part about all of this is that it's preventable. And this is something that we all need to take a part of so that it doesn't happen to one of us and that we're not part of the headlines. So since May, I've been a part of a lot of rallies and speaking events because of Uvalde and Buffalo and, of course, Highland Park. I'm sure that a lot of people felt that when that happened in Highland Park, how could this happen so close to home? How could this happen in a wealthy area? Well, as we've learned, gun violence is not keeping us safe no matter what your zip code is, no matter what your socioeconomic status is. And as we've seen, that gun violence is also unique to America. This doesn't happen in other peer countries. Gun deaths are now the leading cause of death in children. And that was just from this year that this statistic came out. So that alone hopefully will get people with their eyes open and to want to do something, not just today, but every day after today. And so one of the programs, the messages that Moms Demand has, it's Be Smart for Kids. And the safe storage was touched upon by the other speakers tonight. And what Be Smart for Kids is, the SMART is an acronym. So the S is secure all guns in the homes and in vehicles, model responsible gun behavior, ask about the presence of guns in other homes, recognize the role of guns and suicide, and to tell everyone about this message. Last month was Suicide Prevention Awareness Month for September. I'm going to throw out a few statistics. So America gun suicide, the rate is nearly 12 times higher than other high-income countries. Gun access increases one's risk of death by 3 times. And over 3,000 young people die from firearm suicide, up 53% over the past decade. So again, that R in Be Smart is highlighting how important that if a gun is present, the likelihood for suicide is going to increase. This month, for October, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and MOMS highlights the intersection of gun violence and domestic violence. One of the things that we can be proud about is that for the Safer Communities Act, part of that is closing the boyfriend loophole. And what that does is it criminalizes people who are in domestic partnerships and not just people who are married, so that if there is an incident of gun violence, that they won't have access to guns, just like as if they were married to someone. Also, a phrase I'm going to throw out is red flag laws, otherwise known as extreme risk protection orders. And that's something that fortunately in Illinois is available. So if someone is a danger to themselves or to others, you can file a petition with a judge, and it's temporary, it's only for a short amount of time, but it's so that that person won't have access to their guns during that time. And after that duration, you can petition the judge again. Only 20 states and Washington, D.C. have a red flag law. So that's something that Moms Demand is working on, so that that is happening in every state in our country. So one of the things that I'd like to have all of you take away are ways to take action. Obviously, we have the midterms next month. And one of the things you can do is vote, obviously. And we have a website, gunsensevoter.org. And so it has a list of candidates in every state in the country. So not just Illinois, you can share this with family and friends. And that way people can see who the legislators are that are supporting gun safety and wanting to push for safer laws so that we can all live our lives as we should be able to. These gun sense candidates need our help though. So if you have the time, besides voting, please write postcards, please phone bank for them, please canvass for them, because there's a lot of energy, as Representative Didich is in that it's not just a one-person show. There's a lot of people that need to get on board and help so that these candidates can get elected to make our country safer. Again, the Be Smart for Kids program, spread that message. I've got some information out in the sanctuary that you can take home with you. One of the things that Moms Demand is doing is getting volunteers to go in front of school districts and spread the Be Smart message so that school districts can share that information with family and emphasize the importance of securing guns. Something so simple can really help save lives. And then the last couple things, the simple thing you can do right now is text READY to 64433, and that will get you looped in to your local Moms Demand action group. There's also a Moms Demand app, which has the events for the month and all the news that's happening that we should be aware of. So I'm hoping for the speech that it's a takeaway that gives something that people can do, something tangible, something easy. It's something we can all take a part of and something that all we really need to take a part of. Thank you for your time.
I'm going to extend your remarks for a minute, too. Share one of the things I heard you say one time, which was really struck me, was I think part of the Be Smart program is it's okay as a parent to ask another parent when your child goes to the house if there's a gun in the house. I never thought of that before, so I thought that's really helpful. Let's have a round of applause for our terrific speakers. Okay, I think I'm going to have Sue Fujio read the first question, and then we'll have a 20-minute of questions, and we'll wrap it up.
Okay, I'm going to direct this first question to Lieutenant Anderson. Given modern-day technology, are there security measures that can be built into guns, making them able to be used only by the owner or easily traceable if stolen, or, you know, anything that makes them more secure that could be required? Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you for the question. I do not have enough of a background regarding technology and guns and whether or not they could be like single use or tied to singular individual. Certainly firearms do have serial numbers. However, in this state, there isn't a registration process currently. So again, out of all the firearms in the United States, I had mentioned there are only just over 6 million that are registered, and that varies by state and by type of weapon.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to direct this to Representative Didich, although we may want some other viewpoints as well. It's been reported that survivors and families of victims of the Highland Park shooting have filed lawsuits against Smith & Wesson, citing its marketing of the semi-automatic rifle used in the July 4th attack, as well as 2 gun stores, the accused gunman and his father. Last February, the gunmaker Remington agreed to pay $73 million to the families of 9 of the Sandy Hook school shooting victims. Do you think suing gun manufacturers for their marketing tactics or violations of consumer protection laws can or will make a difference in making it harder for assault weapons to end up in the hands of people who should not have them?
Yeah, that's a great question. It'll be very interesting to see how these lawsuits originating in Highland Park play out. That's something I think in the legislature we're going to be monitoring very closely to see if they're successful or unsuccessful, and whether that's a possible avenue for us to crack down on some of the harmful practices by gun dealers. I know there is a federal law in the books that severely restricts the ability to sue a gun manufacturer for harm caused by the products that they made. It's a heightened standard, right? It's not a strict liability standard where simply by using the gun from that manufacturer holds them liable. It's a much higher standard. So part of that is a federal issue of whether the federal government will, the federal Congress will make a decision to make it easier to sue gun dealers. The other aspect of this, which is something that that kind of is the black cloud over all of our public policy conversations, is what is the Supreme Court going to allow us to do? We currently have a United States Supreme Court that interprets the Second Amendment very expansively, and they're very resistant to anything that restricts the ability of people to acquire firearms. So, as we explore more creative solutions, such as making it easier to sue gun dealers or requiring liability insurance or a whole host of other things that have been proposed, we have to be cognizant of how the Supreme Court has ruled on these types of things, because I think earlier this year they threw out what I thought was a pretty good law in New York State, because they decided that the way that New York had set up their regulation regime ran afoul of the Second Amendment of the Constitution, so New York had to start from scratch. And then you'll have a period of time where there's nothing on the books at all, right? So we want to be careful as we're pursuing these types of policy changes, that we're doing it in a way that we're hopeful that the Supreme Court will allow us to proceed with.
I have another question for either of the police officers. There is a split in the gun violence prevention movement as to whether voluntary gun buyback programs are a good idea. What are your thoughts on that? Has there been one in Buffalo Grove?
I don't want to give an opinion on it per se. I
Okay.
will tell you that we have had a gun buyback event in Buffalo Grove. It was quite a few years ago. I actually inquired about that prior to this event. The majority, all that we could find, because it was so long ago, was that the majority of the firearms that were turned in were more or less inoperable. And that was basically the response I received. So I can't speak to the success of gun buyback programs in other areas.
Thank you. I think this is also for either of the police officers. What happens when people are required to turn in their firearms, like when their FOID card is revoked, but they don't? Will the police try to recover the firearm themselves? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
So, as mentioned with that clear and present danger form, individuals are required to either turn in their firearms or transfer them to another individual within 48 hours. We do receive notice as a law enforcement agency when that notice has been sent out. Currently, we are not knocking down doors or entering people's homes in the village of Buffalo Grove when that happens. I'm not aware of any other community doing that either. One of the issues that we found, quite frankly, is that a FOID card, as I had mentioned, is valid for 10 years. And oftentimes people move within a 10-year period. So we might receive a notice here that a FOID card is revoked, but that person has long since moved out of town. So they may or may not even reside in the area. But due to the U.S. Constitution and our requirements for having to follow the laws there, we are not making forcible entry into residents to search for firearms. Now, if we can build a case, we are able to secure a search warrant to go into someone's home. So there is a workaround for that if we don't have permission. I'm not aware of that happening in Buffalo Grove yet, but that is an option for us.
Thank you. I think that answered a couple other questions that were here too. Okay, we have a question. Please explain firearm restraining orders. Would that be what you've referred to as clear and present danger or red flags laws? And maybe whoever asked that question might be able to clarify, is that something?
A firearm restraining order is a judicial process by which either a member of law enforcement or a family member of an individual can go to court and petition to require a certain individual to surrender their firearms for a period of time because there's a belief that that person is a danger to themselves or to others. It's a little different than the clear and present danger standard. The clear and present danger report, that goes to the Illinois State Police, and there's a potential revocation of a FOID card. A firearm restraining order is a potentially much faster process where if you have a family member who, for one reason or another, you believe is an imminent danger to themselves or others, you can go to the circuit court in Lake County, it's in Waukegan, and in Cook County, there's a few different ones, and petition the judge to require that individual to surrender their firearms.
Thank you for clarifying the difference between those, and that's exactly why we asked all of you to come tonight, is to clarify the things that we didn't understand. Okay, this is a long one. I'm gonna read it. I was at Holmes Junior High last week during the lockdown, and I think most of us probably, since we're local, heard about that on the news. We were told a student had brought a gun to school and the school was locked down for 3 hours. It was a airsoft gun and several kids were involved. Are you seeing more situations like that? With kids using the airsoft guns, and how do you deal with that? Is there consequences for the kids?
I mean, I could say as a former school resource officer, I think that kids with airsoft guns it's becoming more in the media now because of what's been going on. Some of these things have always been happening, but because of the times now, we're taking these issues more seriously. Where years and years ago, somebody brought an airsoft gun to school, no big deal, send them home. Let's make it a teachable moment. Now, these days, we're taking these type of situations extremely serious. We're putting schools on lockdown, and we're looking more into those situations. Hope that answers the question.
Do you have any? No, okay. I think, hopefully we've covered most of your questions, and you'll have an opportunity to ask some more of our panelists afterwards. So, yeah, go ahead, Jean.
Thank you so much for those great questions and for the really thoughtful answers. I think we're going to wrap it up here. I think I hear the rain outside, so what would be more fun than to sit out in our fireside room and talk to our wonderful speakers, have some cookies and some refreshments. Please feel free to take some of the materials that are on the table outside of the sanctuary. Our speakers have all brought handouts. We've got a few ourselves. And also, if you're interested in staying involved in this topic, there's 2 clipboards where you can put your name and email address, and maybe we will do another program, or maybe we'll figure out a way to kind of stay involved, because as we've learned tonight, this is not a really easy and simple topic. So thank you again for so many of you for coming out, and let's give our speakers another round of applause.